Grüezi miteinander, wie gesagt, mein Name ist Erich Sieber und ich werde über die neue Asset Class Food Tech reden. It's I've been asked actually to speak in English so that also our friends from France understand what I'm saying. So I'm going to make you some examples which are really practical. You know, what is actually impact really on the level of investing into young companies. So PeakBridge is a food tech venture capital firm. We only do food tech. My background is 25 years with the Nestle Group, 6 years in Asia in operations, and 18 years at Nestle's corporate venture fund. So I've been investing in innovation in food tech for over 20 years. Now, when you had your coffee here, you probably didn't think about where the coffee actually comes from. So it might come from Abaré in the state of São Paulo, with fertilizers, maybe from Russia, and pesticides, maybe from Bayer, sprayed on maybe with planes from Pilatus, and then shipped by trucks overnight with pretty bad diesel engines on the bad roads of Brazil to the São Paulo harbor. And from there with some sulfur ships to Rotterdam, where then the coffee bean is roasted so that the added value is in Europe and not in Brazil. Maybe packed in some plastic, which comes from Aramco, so one of the countries that our friend thinks is not a good country. And then distributed maybe by Lireco here to Bourolac, consumed by you, and then a third of this is thrown away because actually food waste is a third of the production. So that's the supply chain we talk about. It's the biggest industry on earth. It's about 10 trillion. It employs about 40% of the people on earth, mainly in emerging markets. So this industry is under tremendous pressure to change right now. So one is food security, which we have learned through COVID and the Ukraine war. You know, countries like Egypt, 105 million people, actually import 80% of their grains from Ukraine and Russia. So right now they cannot pay for it. So this has a social impact where revolutions are made of. So food security is not a luxury, not to be able to have your 3 breads a day. It's about social upheaval. And we can only produce locally or regionally with technologies. Then the second point is sustainability. We have talked a lot about it, which what we usually call impact. Right? You know probably that a third of the greenhouse gases actually come from this industry. Also 70% of the water used and 80% of the water polluted comes from this industry. But some other facts which you might have not on top of your mind, 94% of all animals on Earth are feedstock. So basically are 4 species, beef, chicken, pork, and lamb. And only 6% of all animals on Earth are still wild, so thank you for biodiversity. Now, to have these 94% animals, we give them 80% of the antibiotics we use, and so today you have 1.2 million people who die in hospitals because of bugs that are resistant to antibiotics. So it's an industry that has to change. If you think about proteins, we cut the Amazon to grow soya, which we ship to Brazil, to do beef, which is sent to China. And this is actually 6 protein outs for 1 protein with meat, so we could reduce our agricultural footprint by 6 times if we would be vegan. Now, I like my steak, but just to make a point what it actually means in reality. The third point is what we call the new consumer. So young people today with their social media, with Netflix, they actually know how food is produced and they care. So some are vegan, some are pescatarians, some change to a keto diet, which is very hard for the food industry to keep track of. So it changes every 6 months. There's the new hit, there's the new thing. Then you see a picture with a turtle in a plastic straw, and so 6 months later, the plastic straw industry is dead. So this change, this speed of change is quite interesting. One quite interesting number is if you compare what the 10 biggest food companies spend in R&D compared with software or pharma. So software spends about 12% in R&D of their revenue. Pharma, 18, yeah, makes sense. Food, 0.4, so nothing. Why is that? It's a low margin business. And basically what most companies do is to buy innovation and buy market share instead of actually investing. So this is good for me because that's my trade exit, right? So we sell basically to food companies our startups. But of course it's not good for the planet. And now this, if you look at the latest numbers, so when I started in 2000 in investing in food tech, there was no food tech. We were the only ones. Last year, it was 52 billion, which was invested by venture capital in food tech. This goes, of course, from aquaculture to Uber Eats, right? But 52 billion versus 2 billion that the 10 biggest food companies invest in 5 years. So you can imagine what kind of innovation is coming to this sector and why it's a sector that many people, especially impact, talk about today. The last point is Industry 4.0, right? I actually started my company because this today, biotech, sensors, data, AI, make the venture model possible. We need 10 times potential, 10 times returns per company. We don't get it all the time, but that has to be target. And we only can get this with proprietary, scalable technology. And today that technology is here. And that's again why you see this growth in food tech venture capital in general. So where do we invest? So if you look at the value chain from the farm to the consumers, the farm actually is a low margin business. It's also a very politicized business and has a very slow adoption circle of innovation. If you talk to farmers, each farmer is different. To convince them to actually adopt something, try something, grow it out, you probably a 10-year closed-end venture fund is not the right thing. You probably need impact funds, you need evergreen funds to actually have this kind of time because you need 15 to 20 years. So we don't do the farm, even though it's huge in impact, especially in emerging markets. And we don't do the consumer. So if we do only marketing like Oatly or like Beyond Meat, which you have seen the share price, huge at IPO, but crashing like 3 times since, you realize if you don't have something protectable, then you come actually to food multiples, and food multiples are usually 3 to 4, maybe 5 times revenue, and not 18 times revenue. And my dear friend Rolf Hiltel from the Veggie Hiltel next to us probably makes better burger than Beyond Meat for the last 50 years. So we don't invest in non-tech, we really invest into the technology after the farm and before the consumer. So where do we invest and which do we think are interesting segments? So we think that ingredients is where the innovation actually is in the food industry. You know that Givaudan has a 32 EBIT multiple, right? Because they do invest in R&D. And so all of these natural ingredients, functional ingredients, that's very interesting. And I'm going to make you a couple of examples because I think examples really make it alive. The second part we invest is, of course, alternative protein. Of the 50 billion, 25% goes in alternative protein. But there again, we think that we don't want to choose or pick the brand that will win because who can compete with Nestle or any of these companies. But we invest in companies that help to make these products actually healthy because many of these products are highly processed. They're not really healthy products. They're sustainable but not healthy and usually not really good tasting. So we invest in companies that improve that clean label and the taste. And then in the synthetic meat, you know that the trend will be to actually produce proteins in factories. So there's many companies in the clean meat sector. Now my view is I think this will come, but it will take another 10 to 20 years. I think the regulatory, if you talk food, people forget, it's not just you grow and you sell. You have to prove it's actually healthy and clean. So the regulatory aspect is very difficult, especially in Europe. So until you get a stake, which is really go through the European regulation, it will take time. And I think personally this will be driven by China because China needs animal proteins. They have issue with the porks, as you know. And so I think that is something that China really can drive. But in single proteins like gluten or whey or casein or fish like cod. Cod is a fish that you cannot farm. There's only 20% left. It's very expensive, high margin, so that's something that we invest in. And then AI data. This industry that does not lose data. So when we think about the next flavor of Henye, we do it in focus groups. We ask people like you in here, what's the next flavor? That's from the 60s, right? So we invest in a company, for example, that scans in the US all the menus which are online, from Michelin Star to Uber Eats, all the recipe sites, all the tweets, blogs, whatever. So these are billions of data points per day. And they know that on this street, people consume this, look at this, cook this. And therefore, they know the trend over time in New York, in San Francisco, in New Orleans, and can tell Uber Eats which menu to do in the ghost kitchen, Marriott, which restaurant to put in a hotel, and Nestle, which new flavor will probably be coming in Boston versus San Diego. So that's really SaaS models which are really interesting. Then we do invest in health. We all know that we are what we eat, and I don't know if people realize, but you replace actually organs all the time, and even your bones are actually redone every about 22 years. So you are what you eat, so health is very important. And there, for example, personalized nutrition is a very interesting field. And we just doing an investment in a company that takes your blood test, takes your DNA test, takes your Fitbit things, and gives you a daily recommendation how to change your lifestyle. And then you check this every 3 months if this is possible through a subscription model again. Very interesting company, 25 million revenues this year, 3 years old. And the last point, which we do invest, is alternative farming. And there is my best example that I really like. It's called Vanilla Vida. If you look at vanilla, it's the biggest flavor. Everything has vanilla inside, but 95% is actually a byproduct from petrol. So to your point, hard to invest in vanilla because usually it's actually made out of Aramco's products. So this company, and so you have to know, usually they're actually grown in Madagascar or other tropical countries. Each flower is hand pollinized. Each bean is hand picked and then dried on the street, similar to cacao. And it's actually the drying process which makes the bean produce vanillin. So this company first managed to grow vanilla in greenhouses. So now you can grow it in Portugal or in France next to Givaudan's perfume factory. But more importantly, they have a natural process to double or triple the vanillin content completely naturally during drying. So this is really interesting. 1 kilo today is about $250. So if you can double that, that means $500 for the same kilo. That's food tech. That's protected, IP protected, natural investment. It's sustainable because it uses 95% less water. It's sustainable because it shortens the supply things. And we also looked at people in Madagascar. So actually, because the process works on every bean, we can take Madagascar's vanilla and make it higher resources. So we look from a HSE point on both. Today, we raise our third fund together with a partnership with Edmond Rothschild, and we have Carlos here and Timo here, who are here if you want to talk about it. And this is an SDG Article 9 fund. So in food tech, as you've seen, whatever you do actually helps the supply chain, right? To be ESG compliant is pretty easy. But SDG Article 9 is really important that the companies that we invest in change more than they would have if we had not invested. So when you take Vanilla Vida, actually the CEO says, I have 10 people, I work about 80 hours a week, I don't want to do more admin. So we have to convince him that by reporting that his clients, the Nestlé's and Dr. Oetker of this world, actually can then use that data and say, we have an amazing supplier. So you have to work with these startups, you actually have to convince them. And also, I like the thing about the legal impact by Maître Coller. So 20% of our carry is linked to predefined goals now on achieving of the fund in 10 years, and if we don't achieve them, we actually wire that money to an NGO. So if we do fraud in that sense, we don't need to go to the tribunal, we can actually just wire 20% of our carry to an NGO, and this is how we make sure that we do the right thing. So this is what I wanted to talk about food tech. Now I can go on forever with examples, but I think it shows really how you can invest in day-to-day, you create impact, but you also create returns, because if you don't have returns, you cannot reinvest, right? And so we really do both. We want to have return, the typical venture capital return of 20 to 25% net ROI, but we also want to achieve a better world with our investment. Thank you very much.